need to explain about this particular song. The main character of this song is a real person. Mimi LaValle is her real name, and she's about 4'9", blonde hair, big smile, pierced lip. So you can see why the Army finds her presence on their base so threatening. She was arrested, she's a friend of ours, she was arrested 2 years ago at the protest outside the School of the Americas. The School of the Americas is a U.S. Army training camp in Columbus, Georgia. The U.S. Army trains people mostly who come from South and Central America to be trained in what the U.S. Army calls counterinsurgency techniques. And we're not sure what that means. They're not very explicit about it. But the graduates from this school include such luminaries as Manuel Noriega and some of the Somoza dynasty in Nicaragua, dictators there until the early 80s. The El Salvadoran death squads have many members who have graduated from the School of the Americas, same with the Colombian death squads, the Guatemalan death squads, the Chilean death squads, the list goes on. So for the last 15 years or so, there's been a protest there every year. It was started by a fellow named Father Roy Bourgeois, also his real name. He started it all by himself. He climbed up a tree outside the Army training camp and he played a tape of Oscar Romero, bishop in El Salvador, who had been killed by graduates of the School of the Americas. The next year, Father Roy was back and he had about 15 of his friends with him. 15 years later, when we were there in 2002, he was back again and he had 15,000 of his friends with him. The goal is to shut down the School of the Americas, and that protest goes on every year. This one's coming up late November.
Actually, this year it's November 16th through the 18th.
Off every year between, on the one hand, the U.S. Army with all of its weaponry and training and funding, and on the other hand, nuns. And what's even more surprising to people about this is that the nuns always win. The sun over Georgia was gently ascending, and the beautiful bugler was barely beginning, and the beautiful bugler was barely beginning to demolish the dreams of the boys at Fort Benning, and the chef was polluting the plates. Corporal Cornpuff was humming his hummer when the shriek of a siren disrupted his slumber, announcing a somewhat disgruntling number of civilians outside the gates.
Well, the coffee was bland and the speeches were blander as the squadron commander began to meander in the manner of Hannibal and Alexander, and the grunts were beginning to grunt. He said, "See the protesters infesting this sector? Well, men, let's begin exercising the specter in the manner of Hector and Hannibal Lecter. These nuns are a menacing front." Then Mimi LaValle and 100 nuns marched up Zuckerman Avenue, and the army commander put his head in his hands as he heard the proverbial thunder of shoes.
And he spoke not a word, but the look on his face meant the whole army base better hide in the basement. Strategically speaking, there isn't a thing to be done. In the face of Mimi LaValle and 100 nuns.
Corporal Cologne called to Colonel Cologne from the outermost reaches of the protest zone. He said, "I can't get a signal on my cellular phone, and I sort of suspect foul play." Colonel Cologne, he replied with a scowl from the tip of his toupee to the brink of his jowl. "Hey, only the army's allowed to play foul. Those protesters are gonna pay." And as the general's jaws clamped down on his denture, he said, "Bunch of grandmas for the state penitentiary. They look like deposits from the 17th century, and that's where the law's gonna send them." But then a soldier in camouflage stood up and stated, "But your argument, sir, has been neatly negated by the fact that the army itself is outdated, so their demos are a perfect addendum." And then Mimi LaValle and 100 nuns came marching up Ingersoll Street, and as they were amassing round the school of assassins, the whole of Fort Benning turned white as a sheet. And Colonel Cologne was too tongue-tied to answer when Corporal Cologne said, "We don't stand a chance, sir. All we've got are millions of tanks and guns." Whereas they've got Mimi LaValle and 100 nuns. Men were running like rabbits from those heroes and habits, and the sergeant was struggling to stare down the abyss of the songs Mimi sung at the top of her lungs. Maybe the caisson songs sound like Barney. The commander was mumbling, "Where do they come from? It's 100 nuns. What a non-conundrum, so forget about the gunnery and get me to a nunnery. Oh, please let me out of the army." Well, the view from the war room was less than auspicious, and the boys in munitions were becoming seditious, and the chief statistician and all the tacticians in strategic command and vamoosed. But they left a report whose conclusions were telling. If you sort of ignored all the grammar and spelling, it said passive resistance is strangely compelling, which none of us could have deduced. And when the sergeant screamed charge, they're surrounding the fort. The small silence got large screaming orders, you'll bust your aorta.
But the Sarge just regarded his health.
So when the army gets arduous, your skins get thin. Boys, I'm gonna discharge you as soon as we win. Put a lid on the Sarge, we're not waiting till then. Why don't you handle this battle yourself? They unloaded his Uzi when they brought the bad news, so he wouldn't go shooting the bearer. Sir, all of the squadrons are quitting their quadrants, and the nuns are unleashing their pacifist terror. The outlook was dreary, but it got even drearier when Mother Superior pierced the interior, and that was the day we saw the SOA overrun by a team of Mimi LaValle and 100 nuns. You can listen through the gaps in the distant thunderclaps as the general yaps at his men. He's saying, promise me, private, that we're gonna survive it. Is he down there talking to his privates again? Private, either my brain's going mushy and moist, or they're cracking Fort Benning in half like an oyster. Can you get me their headquarters? Put up the cloister, can you tell me what this is about? Sir, I ventured outside and I spoke to a sister who put us on a listserv for war tax resistors. I was going to arrest her, but I'm getting a blister, so I think I'm gonna sit this one out. Well, the boys in the fort were dismantling the borders when the corporal reported to the general's quarters. 3/4 of the fort would be following orders if you order the fort to surrender. Because, sir, I assure you, you'll be disconcerted when you learn that the current cadets have deserted. I've just been alerted that the colonel's converted and the sergeant's rethinking his gender. And the nuns are invading and they're calmly persuading our commander to sign up as a monk. Also Corporal Clone and I just started dating, and he's probably waiting for me at my bunk. So we're abandoning camp until the nuns overwhelm it. Sir, might I suggest that you tie-dye your helmet? You need a few colors and khakis as dull as it comes. But there's still army bases all over the place. All the real work has only begun. And they're saying Fort Benning is just the beginning. Tomorrow they're heading for Camp Pendleton. Corporal, give me your honest assessment before you go trading your vest for a vestment. Do you as a realist believe that this thing can be done by 100 idealists?
Oh no, sir, 101.
So the next time you see me, I'll be marching with Mimi LaValle and 100